my wife said, "I cook for my kids, not for you. You're a grown man." I stayed silent. Weeks later, when the divorce papers landed, she finally asked what was for dinner. Looking back, I should have recognized the signs much earlier, but sometimes you're too close to a situation to see it clearly until someone delivers a line that changes everything. I walked through the front door of our suburban home after a particularly long day at the veterinary clinic, the familiar scent of garlic and herbs filling the air, and I felt that automatic smile that comes from anticipating a family dinner together. Laura was at the stove, efficiently plating what looked like her famous chicken parmesan for our two kids, Emma and Jake, ages 8 and 10 respectively. The kitchen island was set with 3 plates, 3 sets of silverware, 3 glasses of milk, and I stood there for a moment processing what I was seeing before the reality hit me. "Smells amazing in here," I said, loosening my tie and washing my hands at the kitchen sink. Rough day with a German Shepherd who decided surgery was optional, but this definitely makes it better. Laura didn't look up from her careful plating, her auburn hair falling in a curtain that obscured her expression. "There's leftover pizza in the fridge if you're hungry," she said with the same tone someone might use to inform a house guest about Wi-Fi passwords. I stopped drying my hands, the kitchen towel suspended between my fingers as I tried to process what I'd just heard. I was hoping we could all eat together tonight, maybe catch up on everyone's day. That's when she finally looked at me, her green eyes holding an expression I'd never seen directed at me before, something cold and dismissive that made my stomach clench. "I cook for my kids, not for you," she said, each word delivered with surgical precision. "You're a grown man, David. Figure it out." Emma and Jake exchanged glances across the kitchen island, their forks hovering uncertainly over their plates, and I realized they'd witnessed this moment that felt like a public execution of whatever remained of our marriage. I stood there absorbing the humiliation, the casual cruelty of being dismissed in front of our children, and something fundamental shifted inside me. The woman I'd built a life with, bought a house with, raised children with, had just relegated me to the status of an unwelcome boarder who should be grateful for leftover pizza. "Got it," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. I folded the kitchen towel with deliberate care, placed it on the counter, and walked to my home office without another word. Behind me, I heard Emma's small voice asking, "Mom, why can't Daddy eat with us?" and Laura's sharp response that dinner was getting cold. I closed the office door, sat at my desk, and opened my laptop with hands that were surprisingly steady. For the next 3 hours, while my family ate dinner and watched a movie without me, I researched divorce attorneys, asset protection strategies, and custody laws in our state. I made a list of our joint accounts, investments, and properties, documenting everything with the same methodical precision I used when diagnosing sick animals. By the time Laura went to bed, I had consultations scheduled with 3 different family law attorneys and had begun the process of understanding exactly what my life was about to become. The leftover pizza remained untouched in the refrigerator, and I realized I'd lost my appetite for more than just dinner. Over the following weeks, I began documenting Laura's behavior with the same systematic approach I used for complex medical cases, and the pattern that emerged was both disturbing and enlightening. Every morning, I'd prepare breakfast for myself while Laura made elaborate pancakes or French toast for Emma and Jake, pointedly ignoring my presence as if I were invisible furniture that happened to occupy space in her kitchen. She'd pack their lunches with care, adding little notes and their favorite snacks, while I assembled my own sandwich and coffee in what felt like a choreographed dance of avoidance. My veterinary practice provided a substantial income that funded our mortgage, car payments, private school tuition, and Laura's freelance graphic design equipment, yet she'd begun telling anyone who'd listen that I was emotionally unavailable and didn't contribute to household responsibilities. I discovered this particular narrative during a chance encounter with our neighbor Susan, who mentioned with genuine concern that Laura had confided how difficult it was being married to someone who expected to be waited on hand and foot. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering I'd been doing my own laundry, cleaning my own dishes, and essentially living like a tenant in my own home for the better part of 2 months. Laura systematically excluded me from family activities, organizing movie nights, zoo visits, and restaurant dinners as mommy and kids time, while I worked late or found other ways to occupy myself. She'd post photos on social media of these outings with captions like, "My whole world," and "everything I need," making sure our mutual friends understood that their happy family portrait didn't include me. The children began asking fewer questions about my absence from family activities, and I realized Laura had been coaching them to view these exclusions as normal, perhaps even preferable. During parent-teacher conferences, she'd schedule meetings without informing me, then tell the teachers I was too busy with work to attend, effectively painting me as a disengaged father who prioritized career over family. I started receiving concerned calls from Emma's teacher and Jake's soccer coach, wondering if everything was okay at home since I'd become noticeably absent from school events. Meanwhile, I quietly opened a separate checking account, changed my direct deposit to split between our joint account and my new personal one, and began moving important documents to a safety deposit box Laura didn't know existed. My attorney, Margaret Foster, advised me to maintain detailed records of every interaction, every exclusion, every instance of parental alienation, while continuing to fulfill my financial obligations to avoid any appearance of abandonment. I bought a small notebook and began documenting dates, times, and circumstances of Laura's behavior, creating a paper trail that would prove invaluable in custody proceedings. The most painful discovery came when I overheard Laura on the phone with her sister, describing me as, like having another child, but one who pays the bills, followed by bitter laughter that made my chest ache with recognition of how thoroughly our marriage had deteriorated. My methodical investigation into our financial accounts revealed disturbing patterns that explained Laura's sudden confidence in treating me like an unwanted boarder, and the discoveries went far beyond simple marital discord. Credit card statements showed charges I'd never authorized, expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never visited together, weekend spa retreats she'd claimed were work conferences, and shopping sprees that coincided with days she'd told me she was meeting clients. One particular statement showed a $340 dinner at Romano's, an upscale Italian place across town, on a Tuesday evening when she'd claimed to be working late on a rebranding project for a local business. I called Romano's and discovered they kept reservation records. Laura had dined there with someone named Marcus Delacroix, and they'd been regulars for the past 3 months. Marcus Delacroix turned out to be a divorced father from Jake's soccer team, someone I'd spoken to briefly at games but never considered significant enough to remember clearly. Social media investigation revealed he was indeed divorced, at least according to his Facebook status, and his posts showed a lifestyle that seemed inconsistent with his job as a middle school teacher. My attorney Margaret suggested hiring a private investigator, but I preferred handling the reconnaissance myself, using skills I'd developed tracking down medical histories and symptoms in my veterinary practice. Laura's phone records, which I could access through our family plan, showed hundreds of texts and calls to Marcus's number, often late at night when she claimed to be working on design projects in her home office. Her laptop browser history, accessed during one of her Saturday client meetings, revealed searches for divorce attorneys, asset hiding strategies, and, surprisingly, investigations into Marcus's background that suggested she'd been doing her own detective work. The most shocking discovery came when I found draft emails in her deleted folder, messages to Marcus discussing their future together, and complaints about being trapped in a loveless marriage with a man who doesn't appreciate what he has. But the real bombshell was Marcus's response, which I found in her saved folder. He'd been lying about his divorce status and was actually still married, using Laura for what appeared to be a convenient affair while his wife traveled frequently for her pharmaceutical sales job. Laura had been systematically destroying our marriage for a man who was deceiving her just as thoroughly as she was deceiving me, and the irony was almost too perfect to believe. I documented everything with screenshots, printed emails, and bank statement copies, building a case that would protect both my assets and my relationship with our children. Meanwhile, Laura continued her hostile behavior, now openly discussing needing space to figure things out with mutual friends, apparently testing the waters for public opinion on a potential separation. She'd begun staying out later, claiming client dinners and networking events, while I maintained my routine of coming home to an empty house and cooking solitary meals. The children started asking more pointed questions about why Mommy was never home for bedtime stories anymore, and I realized Laura's affair was beginning to impact them in ways that went far beyond excluding me from family dinners. My attorney advised me to document these instances of neglect as well, building a comprehensive case that would ensure I maintained a strong custody position when the inevitable confrontation finally arrived. I executed my plan on a Tuesday morning with the precision of a complex surgical procedure, serving Laura divorce papers at 7:30 a.m. while she scrambled to get the kids ready for school, her face cycling through confusion, shock, and finally raw panic as she realized the implications of what she was holding. "What is this?" she stammered, the legal documents trembling in her hands while Emma and Jake finished their breakfast, oblivious to the earthquake about to reshape their lives. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said calmly, adjusting my tie before heading to work. "My attorney will explain everything, but the basics are simple. I'm filing for divorce and primary custody, citing parental alienation and financial misconduct." Her face went white as she flipped through pages detailing frozen joint accounts, documentation of her affair, and evidence of her systematic exclusion of me from family life. "You can't do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. "David, we can work this out. I know things have been difficult, but we can fix this." I kissed Emma and Jake goodbye, telling them I'd see them after school as usual, while Laura stood frozen in our kitchen holding the papers that spelled out her new reality. By 9 a.m., I'd made 2 additional phone calls that would complete the destruction of Laura's carefully constructed fantasy, first to Marcus's wife Jennifer, whom I'd tracked down through her pharmaceutical company's employee directory, and second to our mutual friend circle through a group text that simply read, "Laura and I are divorcing due to her affair with Marcus Delacroix. Please respect our privacy during this difficult time." Jennifer Delacroix's reaction was everything I could have hoped for and more. She immediately drove to Marcus's school, confronted him in the faculty parking lot loud enough for several colleagues to overhear, then called Laura directly with a fury that could be heard through the phone from across a room. Laura's carefully maintained image as the wronged wife of an emotionally unavailable husband crumbled within hours as Jennifer shared details of Marcus's other affairs and his history of targeting divorced or unhappy mothers from their children's activities. The humiliation reached its peak during afternoon pickup at Emma's school, where Jennifer cornered Laura in front of a dozen other parents and delivered a verbal destruction so thorough that several people pulled out their phones to record the spectacle. "You're welcome to him," Jennifer announced loudly enough for the entire pickup line to hear. "He's been cheating on me for 3 years with desperate housewives who think he's their ticket to happiness. Congratulations on being the latest victim." Laura's phone began ringing immediately with calls from friends and neighbors who'd witnessed the confrontation, but by then she'd discovered that our joint accounts were frozen, her credit cards were canceled, and her freelance business accounts were separate but insufficient to fund a legal defense. She called me 17 times that afternoon, each message more frantic than the last. "David, please, we need to talk. This is insane, you're destroying our family. The kids need stability, think about what you're doing to them." I responded to none of them, letting Margaret handle all communication while I focused on preparing my temporary apartment and planning custody schedules that would provide our children with the stability Laura had systematically undermined. Marcus disappeared from Laura's life within 48 hours, blocking her number and deleting his social media accounts after Jennifer threatened to expose his affairs to the school district, leaving Laura to face the consequences of her choices completely alone. The children, initially confused by the sudden changes, began gravitating toward my calm consistency as Laura's behavior became increasingly erratic and desperate. Laura's desperation reached a fever pitch as the reality of her situation crystallized into stark financial and social consequences that she'd never anticipated when she began her campaign to push me out of our family. Her freelance graphic design income, which had always been supplemental to my veterinary practice earnings, proved woefully inadequate to fund both legal representation and basic living expenses, forcing her to move back in with her parents after missing 2 rent payments on the apartment she'd hastily secured. The woman who dismissed me as a grown man, who should figure it out, discovered that figuring it out required skills she'd never developed during our marriage, like managing utilities, insurance claims, and the complex financial arrangements that kept our household functioning. Her attempts to manipulate Emma and Jake against me backfired spectacularly during a custody exchange when she broke down screaming about how Daddy destroyed our family, while I stood quietly documenting her behavior with my phone's voice recorder. Why are you yelling at Daddy? Emma asked with the devastating honesty of an 8-year-old, and Laura's response of, because he's a selfish man who only cares about himself, prompted Jake to say, but Daddy never yells at you, Mom. Margaret used these recordings to strengthen our case for supervised visitation, arguing that Laura's emotional instability was creating an unsafe environment for the children. Laura's parents, initially sympathetic to their daughter's claims of being abandoned by an uncaring husband, began questioning her version of events after witnessing her meltdowns during a family barbecue where she spent 20 minutes ranting about my financial abuse to relatives who remembered me as the son-in-law who'd always helped with yard work and holiday preparations. Marcus's complete abandonment devastated Laura more than our divorce proceedings, and she made the mistake of sharing her heartbreak with mutual friends who'd already heard about the school parking lot confrontation from multiple sources. Her social media posts devolved from subtle complaints about unappreciative spouses to bitter quotes about toxic men and knowing your worth, driving away the few supporters she had left. My attorney's generous settlement offer included adequate child support, half the house equity, and her car, but Laura's lawyer advised her to accept immediately rather than face a trial where her affair, parental alienation, and financial misconduct would be exposed in public court records. The final humiliation came when she called me at the veterinary clinic, sobbing about how she never meant for things to go this far, and just wanted to feel appreciated for once, as if her systematic campaign to exclude me from our family had been some kind of misguided attempt at communication rather than deliberate cruelty. I made a terrible mistake, David, she said through tears that sounded genuine for the first time in months. Can we please try counseling? The kids miss having us all together. I listened to her desperation with the same professional detachment I used when delivering difficult diagnoses to pet owners, understanding that her remorse was motivated by consequences rather than genuine recognition of the damage she'd caused. That ship sailed when you decided to cook for your kids but not your husband, I replied calmly. I hope you find what you're looking for, Laura, but it won't be with me. Laura's world continued its systematic collapse as she faced the practical realities of single motherhood without the financial safety net and domestic support system she'd taken for granted during our marriage. The woman who'd confidently declared that grown men should figure things out for themselves discovered that figuring things out required knowledge she'd never bothered to acquire, like understanding why the water heater stopped working, how to negotiate with insurance companies, and why her credit score had plummeted after missing several bill payments she'd forgotten existed. Her cramped apartment became a monument to poor planning and diminished circumstances, with Emma and Jake sleeping on air mattresses in the living room during her custody weekends because she couldn't afford proper furniture. The elaborate meals she'd once prepared for the children devolved into microwave dinners and take-out pizza, ironic considering her previous criticism of my suggestion to eat leftover pizza. Her freelance graphic design business suffered as emotional turmoil affected her creativity and client relationships, with several longtime accounts terminating contracts after she missed deadlines and delivered subpar work while dealing with divorce proceedings. Meanwhile, I thrived in my temporary apartment, which had quickly transformed into a comfortable bachelor pad with a well-equipped kitchen where I experimented with new recipes during my custody time. Emma and Jake loved our cooking adventures, helping me prepare elaborate Sunday brunches and themed dinner nights that I documented with photos showing their genuine smiles and excitement. These posts on social media served as indirect commentary on the difference between a parent who engaged meaningfully with his children versus one who treated family time as a burden to be endured. Laura's attempts at reconciliation became increasingly desperate and transparent, from showing up at the veterinary clinic during my lunch break to sending lengthy emails detailing how much she missed our family traditions that she'd systematically dismantled months earlier. She even contacted Emma's teacher to suggest that the children were struggling with the separation and needed their parents to work together for their sake, not realizing that the teacher had already observed how much happier and more focused both kids had become since the divorce proceedings began. Her parents, who'd initially offered their spare bedroom as temporary refuge, began setting boundaries about her extended stay as her bitterness and self-pity disrupted their retirement routine. You made choices, Laura, her father finally said during a family dinner where she'd spent an hour complaining about my vindictive behavior. Now you need to live with the consequences instead of expecting everyone else to fix your problems. The comment stung because it echoed exactly what she'd told me about being a grown man who should figure things out, and for the first time, she began to understand how cruel and dismissive she'd been during the final months of our marriage. 6 months after Laura had declared that she cooked for her kids, not for me, she found herself sitting alone in her studio apartment on a Thursday evening, staring at a can of soup and wondering if she had the energy to heat it up after another day of scrambling to rebuild her professional reputation and personal life. The divorce had been finalized 3 weeks earlier, with Laura accepting my attorney's settlement offer after her legal counsel warned that a trial would expose details about her affair and financial misconduct that would likely result in even less favorable terms. Emma and Jake had adapted remarkably well to our shared custody arrangement, spending weekdays with Laura and weekends with me in my new 3-bedroom house, complete with the chef's kitchen I'd always wanted and a backyard perfect for the dog we'd adopted together. My social media posts from these weekends showed elaborate father-child cooking sessions, backyard barbecues with my colleagues from the veterinary clinic, and family movie nights that radiated the genuine happiness Laura had spent months trying to exclude me from experiencing. Her own social media presence had dwindled to occasional photos of generic inspirational quotes about strength and self-discovery, a far cry from the confident lifestyle posts that had once showcased her seemingly perfect family life. The text message arrived on a Tuesday evening while I was preparing osso buco for a dinner party with my new girlfriend Rebecca, a fellow veterinarian I'd met through a professional conference who appreciated both my cooking skills and my dedication to our children. "What should I make for dinner tonight?" Laura's message read, followed immediately by a second text. "I know this is weird, but I'm struggling with meal planning and you always made it look so easy." I stared at the message for a long moment, remembering the countless evenings I'd come home hoping to share a family meal only to be dismissed as a grown man who should figure things out for himself. Rebecca looked up from chopping vegetables, raising an eyebrow at my expression. "Everything okay?" she asked with the genuine concern of someone who actually wanted to be part of my daily life rather than merely tolerate my presence. "Just Laura asking for cooking advice," I said, showing her the texts. "The same woman who used to tell me to find my own food because she only cooked for her kids." Rebecca shook her head with the bemused smile of someone who'd heard enough stories about my ex-wife to understand the profound irony of the situation. "Are you going to help her?" she asked, not with jealousy but with curiosity about how I'd handle this particular reversal of fortune. I considered my options while Rebecca returned to preparing our dinner, her presence in my kitchen representing everything Laura had refused to offer: partnership, mutual respect, and genuine appreciation for shared domestic responsibilities. My response was simple and final: try the leftover pizza approach. It worked for me. Laura never replied to that message, but through mutual friends I learned that she'd eventually enrolled in cooking classes at the community college, a practical decision that represented the kind of self-improvement she'd avoided during our marriage. Emma and Jake continued thriving in both households, though they consistently mentioned how much they enjoyed our weekend cooking projects and the stability of knowing their father would always make time for family dinners. The final confirmation that justice had been served came when Laura's landlord called me 6 months later, asking for a character reference before agreeing to renew her lease. "She's a good tenant," he said, "but she mentioned you might vouch for her reliability with commitments." I politely declined, explaining that our relationship was limited to co-parenting matters, and suggested he base his decision on her current track record rather than my past experience. That evening, as Rebecca and I prepared dinner together while Emma and Jake helped set the table, I realized that sometimes the best response to someone who takes you for granted is simply to show them what they've lost by building something better without them. Laura had wanted to cook for her kids, not for me, and now she was cooking for herself alone while I shared meals with people who actually wanted me at the table.